Hello, my name's Andrew, and today we're talking about diet versus drugs. How you can get off of coffee, alcohol, weed, psychedelics, pharmaceuticals, and pretty much any other drug you can think of by changing the foods you eat. So how this video is gonna work is that I'm gonna go through each of these drugs, talk about how I got onto it, the positive and negative side effects of taking it, and how I got off it by changing some of the things that I was eating. I put coffee as number one because that's where a lot of people start. And when I was in college, I started drinking coffee just to like stay awake in classes because there's a lot of classes that I was really bored in, and they were early, like 7 a.m. in the morning, and I would be like drinking, the night before, which we're gonna talk about after that. But anyways, I kind of used coffee as like this superpower drink, to keep myself going. And not just coffee, but also caffeine, energy drinks, Red Bull and stuff like that. We had a like Red Bull truck that would come around the campus and like hand out free Red Bulls. And at the time I thought this is awesome, but then in retrospect, years later, I was like, wow, this is like literally legal drug dealing. After that, when I got a job as a copywriter, I found that I didn't really like agency life very much because I was an introvert and it was like exhausting to me. And the work that I was doing was for clients I didn't like MasterCard and Johnson & Johnson. And so I just started drinking like more and more coffee. I would have a cup a day when I got there. And then I'd also have a cup in the morning, like before I left for work. And then I have like a cup in the afternoon, and it just kept scaling up and up and up and up and up because I found that like my body just grew a tolerance to it, where it didn't affect me. And then also it felt like the longer I stayed there, the more I hated my job and the more I had to like whip my body into doing these things that I didn't want to do in the first place. And it was just awful because I'd sit there at the computer and my heart would be going like, I'd be trying to write tweets for MasterCard and stuff like that. And I knew that it wasn't good for my health, but I didn't know what else to do because I just couldn't function. I was expected to be coming up with creative ideas, but I would go into the break room and try to brainstorm, and I would just like fill this page with just utter garbage. And I felt like I had completely lost my creativity. Then in 2020, I started this challenge called 365 Comics, where I want to draw a comic every day. And I also kind of started doing like personal development challenges with that. And I switched up my diet too. I cut out all these processed foods that I was eating. And I read How Not to Die by Dr. Michael Greger, and he was talking about like lowering sugar and how that can cause inflammation and all sorts of other problems. And I thought, well, why not cut out the energy drinks and coffee too while I'm at it? And basically how I did it, it was really easy. In the morning, I would just take a sip of coffee and then I would just dump the rest out. And at that point, I had scaled back a little bit. So if you're drinking like 5 cups a day, you don't want to immediately go down to 0 because your body will just freak out and you can actually have withdrawal symptoms like with more serious drugs. But honestly, just switching to whole foods and lowering my sugar and working on something that was really fun and fulfilling to me rather than that, crappy copywriting job that I hated, totally obliterated my need for caffeine. And it made me realize that from the beginning, I didn't really understand how coffee or caffeine worked. Like the way that I thought it worked was that it was giving me energy, but in reality, it was only like forcing my body to expend more energy. And because my diet was so messed up and I wasn't getting enough nutrients or just energy in general, the caffeine eventually became pointless because there was no more energy to release. And by the end of my year working as a copywriter, it was like whipping a dead horse, right? Okay, so number 2 is alcohol. And it's really funny because I remember the first time I ever had a sip of alcohol. It was at my grandfather's house. He had been an alcoholic for a lot of his life, and they always had different types of alcohols around, beer in the fridge and wine and stuff like that. So I was over there one time visiting as a little kid, and there was this giant box of what I thought was juice. So I filled up my glass, and then I took this like giant glug of it, and I was like, I literally wanted to throw up. It was so sour and disgusting, and the sink was like occupied and the bathroom was occupied, so I was just like running around for like 2 minutes trying to find somewhere to spit it out. And finally I like went out the front door and was like but then in high school it became like cool to drink, so I'd go over to my friend's house and we'd get into his parents' liquor cabinet, when his parents were away on vacation or something, and then we have a grand old time. And wake up extremely sick and sometimes throwing up the next day. And it only got worse in college, as it does for a lot of people, because that's just like the culture, right? You know, you go to college and suddenly you have no parents around and you can do whatever the hell you want. And so of course you're gonna party. And there were multiple times where I drank so much that I almost ended up in the hospital. Bruh. However, it was fun. You know, when you drink, you get silly and everything starts feeling funny and you lose your inhibitions. And this is why people drink. Like in high school, I felt like a lot of the times I wasn't doing the things that I wanted to do, making the friends that I wanted to make, or, you know, relationships, dating, whatever, because I just had too much anxiety. I was too introverted and nervous and all that stuff. And then when I drank, you know, like all of that disappeared and I became like Superman. But fast forward to 2020, when I read How Not to Die, I realized that alcohol is still alcohol. You know, you use it to clean counters and toilets and things like that, and it has no place in the human body. And in fact, the way that alcohol works is that it deprives your brain of oxygen. You know, it literally kills brain cells, and once those are gone, you can't get them back. Plus, it absolutely destroys the liver, even at small amounts. So I decided to completely get rid of alcohol too around 2020 when I started that drawing challenge and switched my diet to more whole foods. And I did go vegan for that year, but it wasn't really the plant foods. It was more just like increasing the quality of what I was eating, especially eating like higher fat and having enough magnesium. Magnesium is the element that like calms your body down, and most people are deficient in it. So once I raised that back up, I felt like my social anxiety just started to evaporate, you know? And then I was able to open myself up to more things, you know, meeting people at events and, you know, concerts and just like randomly engaging people in conversations. Basically, once I got the junk out of my diet, my brain started to clear up, and then it just felt like I had more energy, you know? So I wasn't getting into these places where I felt stuck, you know, or nervous about not knowing what to say or coming up with something clever. Now, the funny thing about quitting alcohol after I started improving my diet is that there were several times where either from family or friend pressure, I would just like have a few drinks, you know? So like this one time I was working at a shoe store and my manager invited me to like come over to the bar and have a few drinks with him. And at that point, my tolerance was super low. So I was getting tipsy after like 2 or 3 beers, but I didn't enjoy it like I used to enjoy it, because I had found this new sharpness, you know, of experience and happiness and creativity and all this stuff. And it just felt like the more I drank, the more it kind of like numbed down my experience to the point where I couldn't really perceive like fine details. And I remember this happening in college too. Like I would definitely become more outgoing, but then I don't know, if I was like hooking up with someone or something, it would be like I couldn't really enjoy it, you know, once I got really drunk. Number 3 is weed, and that was another one that I picked up in college because, you know, I was kind of a hippie soul. I wore Birkenstocks, so it just seemed like the thing to do. I was also creative. I was there as a writing major, so it's like, you know, who's a writing major at Ithaca College and not smoking weed, right? And again, in the beginning, it was fun, you know. I remember this like tingling sensation all over my body and just coming up with like weird, funny things and writing, you know, poetry and making music and feeling inspired.
Deforestation. We're smoking the wrong trees.
But over time, I just noticed that even though it seemed like I was being more creative, I wasn't actually like finishing anything. I would just have all of these kind of like interesting, quirky, partially finished ideas that never really developed into like a full, you know, song or album of music or collection of poetry or a novel or anything. It was just these like tidbits that I couldn't do anything with, that didn't advance my life any further. And then when I was working in New Jersey, I met this guy who had a basement below his deli, and we used to go there and jam and smoke like a bunch of weed. And again, like in the beginning, it felt like, you know, like a cool, fun thing to do. But over time, I just became so bored. I just started to notice that we would play these like classic rock songs, you know, right? And the songs would just go on and on and on, like this, you know, endless jam that became super monotonous. And the more we smoked, the more like terrible our musical skills became. And it just started to become obvious to me that weed was this thing that just like sucked away all of your motivation. And it sort of made you like delusional, you know, because I thought that I was better at what I was doing than I really was. I thought I was accomplishing more than I really was, when I was really just like sitting on the couch and, you know, doing nothing. And it was the same thing looking around me, seeing friends going absolutely nowhere in life. You know, they would just like smoke a bunch of weed and sit on the couch and watch South Park.
I'll just use my special getting high powers one more time.
Which is fun in small amounts, obviously, but I found with weed that it was just such a strong escape that I just wanted to live in this like passive state all the time, and I was just never accomplishing anything in reality. Then from a health perspective, weed is also terrible for your lungs, like you're inhaling these like hot burning particles, and even if you're using a bong or something with ice in it, still like these charred particles that are being sucked through and going into the most delicate part of your lungs. And yeah, edibles are probably more healthy, but it's back to the same problem of this thing just being a crutch which is holding you back rather than pushing you forward in life. So when I switched to the whole foods diet around 2020, I just realized having so much more energy, I was able to do things in the real world, accomplish, writing a book. And, at the end of the year, I had this like massive yellow book full of artwork, something that I had never done before. And that feeling, the feeling of creating something every day, of living in this world of imagination, was like what I wanted to get from smoking. So it was like, why would I smoke and accomplish nothing when I could accomplish everything that I want to do and feel all the things that I want to do without it? Drug number 4 is psychedelics. This is the one that I would say was the most positive out of all of them, because it's not something that you would take like on a regular basis, Drug number 4 was psychedelics. I would say this is the one that had the most positive impact on my life, because especially in higher doses, it's not something that you're going to be taking every day. But for me, it started back in 2016. I was basically extremely depressed because I had quit my copywriting job. I had started freelancing, but I was just like totally lost. I didn't know what to do. I wasn't making enough money. I didn't really like what I was doing as a freelancer either. And it got to this point where I thought that I had tried everything. I had gone to therapy. I was thinking about taking antidepressants. I was working for myself, doing something creative, which seemed like it should be making me happy, but still I just like couldn't function. I couldn't find any purpose at all in life. So I essentially thought, well, I can try taking psychedelics or I can kill myself. I mean, that was literally how far I had gotten. So I gave it a try, and it was like going through a mental car wash. I just could see all of these like details in my life, like why I was doing everything, all of these negative patterns that I had gotten myself into, and all these strange things about society that had become normalized that, weren't healthy. Around that time, I was also just noticing how people were consuming drugs, not like once in a while like psychedelics, but every day, like caffeine, and just becoming degraded, like not having the energy to be the sort of person that they wanted to be, and just being stuck in these dead-end jobs for years. So LSD was definitely one of the most important experiences of my life. It completely opened my eyes to the way the world is, kind of like the character Neo in The Matrix, where he thinks that he's living this one life and then he sees how things really are in the Matrix. Essentially, I would just take it like once every 6 months. So it was definitely the most least addictive drug that I've ever had. And after you would do a trip, you would be exhausted, and the last thing on earth that you would want to do the next day was trip again, because you had all of these ideas. However, I would say that after like 4 years of doing this, which is roughly 8 trips, it just started to feel like it was less and less effective, because I would do a trip and then I would come up with all these ideas, but then it would be like I didn't quite have enough energy to take action on them in the real world. So it started to create this sort of like delusional energy where I had all these really brilliant ideas in my mind, but that was all they were, ideas. However, in 2021, I started to work with a naturopath, and she introduced me to the idea of micronutrients. We all know about macronutrients, protein and getting enough calories and so on and so forth, the basics. But there are all of these tiny little trace elements, like copper and zinc, that you need to function, especially mentally, because the brain is extremely delicate and it needs a wide variety of nutrients. But anyways, one of the ones that she turned me on to was iodine. And when I started taking a small amount, just with some kelp soaked in water, it was like psychedelics, but manageable, because when you take psychedelics, you're tripping for like 12 hours straight and you can't stop, you have no regulation over your energy and, the speed of your body. But with nutrients and also starting to fast, where I was putting more and more time between when I was eating, I just had this incredible clarity of mind that totally just obliterated my brain fog. And not just for a short amount of time, like when I would take psychedelics and I would feel really good for a few weeks or, a couple months. It was just like consistent, So I kept working on my diet. I eventually integrated a lot more animal foods than I was before with veganism, because I found that I just couldn't really sustain myself on that. And at this point, I haven't had any coffee or alcohol or marijuana or even psychedelics for more than a year. And I'm accomplishing everything that I would want. I have a successful YouTube channel. I'm making a full-time living as a content creator. I'm 23,000 words deep into a sci-fi book project. And every day I just feel like I'm on drugs, but in the best possible beautiful sense, where you have all of the positives, the insights, the energy, the cleverness, but none of the negative side effects, like where your energy is crashing or where you're not really accomplishing the things that you want because your brain is too scattered all over the place with this artificial energy. And you have to understand, when I say that I don't need drugs because I feel better without them, not in the sense of this sort of like straight edge type of person who puts the, the X on their arm, but literally I just feel better in every single way, in every single aspect of my life. Last but not least is number 5, pharmaceutical drugs. So when I was growing up as a kid, I had a lot of health problems and I never really understood why. For example, I developed really terrible allergies to the point where I was just sniffling and being stuffed up and sneezing all the time and like red, itchy eyes. So I went to the doctor and the doctor's like, oh, you have seasonal allergies, you're allergic to pollen, pet fur, that sort of thing. And so he put me on allergy meds. I think I started with like Claritin. Then I tried a bunch of different ones. I ended up on Zyrtec and I just essentially took that every day for years, and it made my symptoms a little bit more bearable, but it didn't really cure anything. And eventually, kind of like coffee, the effectiveness just went down to the point where I had to add a nasal spray. And that was the same thing. I had to cycle through all these different brands, and then one would start working and then it wouldn't start working. And I had all these horrible side effects. Like I would get nosebleeds where my nose would just start bleeding and it wouldn't stop. So partway through my comics challenge, I decided to cut out dairy, and it was like, poof, allergies gone. The first few weeks, I felt a little bit better, and then I was just able to stop taking my meds. And then after 3 months, my allergies were just 100% gone, never came back. And this was something that the medical system told me was impossible. They just diagnosed me with seasonal allergies, and it was like, that's it. All you can do is, manage your symptoms for the rest of your life, but there's no such thing as curing it. And so in that moment, I realized how freaking powerful diet is. And getting rid of dairy also cleared up my lungs to the point where I could get off my inhaler, and I was able to go for a run without ever having any wheezing. And then I found once I got rid of all of the junk, that was clogging my body up, things that I was either allergic to or that were outright toxic, like fast food and soda and caffeine, things like that, I just wasn't getting sick anymore. So I just stopped going to the doctor, I stopped taking flu shots, and at this point I haven't been sick in almost 4 years with either a cold or a flu or anything, which begs the question, what is this magical diet that I'm eating that has solved all these problems and improved my life in so many different ways? I'll preface that by saying that I'm not a health practitioner, and also I don't think that there's one diet that works perfectly for everyone. You kind of just have to experiment and take foods out, put other foods in, research how you're supposed to prepare things in a traditional way, especially with plants, to lower some of the anti-nutrients. But after trying literally every diet under the sun, from keto, high carb, low carb, fruit-based, plant-based, the one diet that worked better than all of the other diets was this one called raw primal. It is probably one of the strangest diets, or at least by modern standards. And essentially what I eat every day is raw bison organs, and raw dairy. I also found, interestingly, that I wasn't actually allergic to dairy. I was only allergic to pasteurized dairy, which is sort of like a drug in and of itself. I think when you cook foods, some of the macronutrients are easier to access, but you lose all of the little details, the beneficial bacteria, the enzymes, the trace nutrients that allow your brain to function at a high level so that you can reach that peak quality of life that you've been dreaming about ever since you were a kid that so few people reach. I also have raw salmon and raw egg yolks, and I do eat a small amount of raw vegan food still, but mostly I've realized that, at least for me, it seems like raw animal-based foods are nature's drugs, but in the healthiest way imaginable. And looking back, the crazy thing for me is like how much time I wasted being on the wrong diet. I didn't grow up eating super unhealthy. I ate kind of like, I would say, an enhanced standard American diet where I was eating a lot of whole foods, but they weren't really prepared in a traditional manner. And maybe once a week or more, we would go out and, to Pizza Hut or something like that, which I would never, ever do now, even the smallest amount. So because I was on the wrong diet for so many years, I literally lost decades of my life where I didn't feel like myself, where I didn't have enough energy to accomplish anything meaningful. But then the past 4 months when I got into this raw primal diet, it has given me so much energy that has completely transformed my entire life. And watching people go into the grocery store and get caffeine, or watching people smoke weed in movies, and remembering how I used to think that that was necessary to be like creative or whatever, is just absolutely ridiculous to me now. Because the past few weeks I started working on the sci-fi book, like I said, and this is a goal that I had not been able to make any progress at all since I was in high school. I had this very small creative spurt I think when I was like a junior, where I wrote about 50 words, 50 to 70 maybe, and that was it. I like gave up on writing because I just didn't have enough energy. But in the past 2 weeks alone, I've written 23,000 words, and I wake up every day just chomping at the bit because I have energy to create this world that I've been dreaming about ever since I was a kid. It's like every morning is Christmas, and even though I'm not on drugs, I feel like I am. I have all of the positives, and everything is within my control. I'm not out there crashing a car. I'm not sitting on my couch watching episode after episode after episode after episode because my brain is so fried from smoking, and I'm no longer relying on the whirlwind of psychedelics that whips up all of these ideas that I don't really ever do anything with. So yeah, that's my take on drugs versus diet. But if you have any questions on finding the right foods for yourself that gives you the energy you need to be creative, etc., let me know in the comments. And thank you guys for hanging out. I'll catch you next time. Peace.